I'm finding it very difficult to leave the racing because there isn't a professional racing equivalent to go into just yet. And I love my car. I can't leave my car, you know? Her name is Nova.
Nova.
She is very much so my baby, as well as the baby of my other team members. And I can't imagine walking away. And so it's kept me at the university for longer.
The world around us is changing faster than ever before. Ideas once only imagined in science fiction are becoming a reality. Throughout the course of our amazing 23-episode season, we'll speak to some of the greatest minds in robotics and artificial intelligence to discuss the groundbreaking work that's fueling it all. I'm your host, Ryan Marine. Join me and my co-host, Paul Mitchell, the president of the Indy Autonomous Challenge, and see why we call this the Inside Track. Today on the Inside Track, we sit down with team leader Stephaine Meyer of Autonomous Tiger Racing at Auburn University to explore this idea. At first, she didn't feel the pull of racing in ways that more traditional gearheads would, but as we will find out, working on the Nova car sparked the interest that has kept her on the track. Later, she discusses how to overcome the various levels of anxiety that come with sending out a race car to compete, even if you're not sure the car is ready. So let's start at the beginning. What brought you to this project? What drew you to this team there at Auburn University?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I actually got started into robotics several years ago in my undergrad. I was never a big racing person, not even a big car person, so I never would have assumed that I was going to be working with these high-speed cars, let alone leading the team one day. But yeah, I fell in love with robotics competitions back in my undergrad. I did what we call ASME design competitions. Back in the day, they used to be things like designing concrete beams to hold a certain amount of weight. Luckily, these days, they're more robotics-based. And then I got to know a bunch of grad students through that project. And one of them said, there's an excellent robotics grad student lab down in Auburn, Alabama. Let's go down there. They'll take you and give you a stipend, and you get to work on robots for a few more years. And I said, industry, robots, let's go do the robots grad degree. And then a few years into that, after working with just general autonomous vehicles and robots, one of my colleagues in the research lab actually found the autonomous competition here. And he said, hey, you're a perception expert, a laser sensor expert. We need one of those. You want to join the team? And again, at this point, I'm not very into racing. I was like, well, I kind of just want to do normal robotics, but I'll help you a little bit. And then next thing you know, I'm doing a lot of the work and like just dead into it along with the rest of them. So
the hook was set at that point.
The hook was set. It's amazing.
What is it about robotics? Why was that something that grabbed your interest?
Right. That's a really good question as well. So I started off just really being interested in programming. I think what really got me about programming is how systematic it is. It's really easy just to organize all of your thoughts, but then you can also double check your thoughts because you run the compiler, you run the program, you look for the errors that have happened. And that's all well and good when you see the numbers and the letters on the screen, but it's even more amazing when you see something move because of it. And that's robotics. That's the logic, the code that actually makes something happen.
What was the first robotics project that you worked on?
The first one I was adjacent to was an obstacle course robot. It had to climb, it went through a water pit, a sand pit, so it could collect up all the sand after it got wet. And then with sandy tires, it had to climb 3 stairs and deliver a resource package. So this was rescue robots that delivered like a package of rice or beans into a hole at the top of the stairs, and then it had to go back. I was really more watching all of the more experienced engineers working on this project, but I definitely caught the competition bug with that. The first one that I was actually hands-on with was more of a manufacturing robot. This one was take a flat sheet of paper, have the robot turn it into some sort of projectile, like a paper airplane, and then test it. And then you got extra points for your robot if it could shoot farther than the rest of them.
Oh, that's really neat.
Yeah.
And then you had to probably decide what's the best projectile, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was completely open, and of course, folding a paper airplane probably gives you the biggest distance, but that's also going to be more complex machinery. Right. We ended up just having the paper rolled into a tube and then crushed. So we make this really compact puck. And then if you've ever played with Hot Wheel tracks, you know they have the wheels spinning like this that your car gets shot through.
Yes.
We just shot the puck through that. It worked pretty well.
My kids love that. So that's right in my wheelhouse, definitely. Now, all those sound like awesome robots.
Right.
But none of them are $1 million+ race car
Exactly,
robots. So when you
exactly.
first saw this Indy Autonomous Challenge car and understood what it was that you were going to be working with, what was your reaction?
Honestly, it's a bit intimidating. It's one thing to take a few pieces of plywood and stick them together into a frame for your puck crushing robot. It's another thing to work with such precise engineering. You don't want to mess this up, and let alone we're running it a whole lot faster. There's not a whole lot of risk with the puck robot or with the stair climbing robot. If it falls off the track, it's fine. If we fall off the track, we're not nearly as fine, and it's very expensive.
Right.
So the stakes are so much higher here, but that does push you to be more precise in the work.
Sure. So you get brought in initially just to help with your one area of expertise.
That's right.
But now it's grown to the point where this is your team. You are leading this team of students that are working on this project.
Exactly.
Take us through that process.
So these cars have a perception stack that includes cameras, which everyone knows what those are, radar, which most people are pretty familiar with, and then LiDAR, which are sort of a laser version of a radar.
Right.
Both radars and LiDARs are sending out electromagnetic pulses into the world just to see where everything is around it. And the LiDAR gives you a lot denser view that's a lot more similar to a camera with all of its pixels than the radar does. So LiDAR is my area of expertise. It sends out those pulses, gives you a really dense scan of locations of things in your environment, and then you need to process that data to determine out of all of these points of locations, what's a car, what's a wall, what's the track. So I'm here just to do that. And I started off getting invited up to Indianapolis. The very first dev, whenever we had these physical cars being put together, all of the teams came together in Indianapolis, and we spent several months in 2021, just all of us living in the area, getting to know each other, coming into work in the garage every day. First on just a single car, and then as the other ones started becoming available, splitting off more into our individual regions. And so I got to see the entire process, while I'm up here, just hanging out with the team, hanging out with the other teams, working on LiDAR drivers, getting ready for the actual LiDAR work. And during the first season, for the first several months, for me, it was just business as usual, just writing code, just testing it on the computer. It's just research. I've done this for years. And then that moment when Will Bryan, our team lead at the time, came up to me and said, "Stephanie, you're up. We have to pass another car in a few days." I'm like, this is my software all of a sudden, because until we had to interact with other vehicles, it was just the controller, it was just the localization and the GPS. And now my perception has to actually see these other cars in order for us to pass them. If my software fails, we could very likely crash into this vehicle and not only hurt our car, but the other person's car, which would just be a disaster. Nobody's crashed yet at this point, and ours could be the first because of my software. And it was terrifying. And in that moment, I was like, I'm not ready. The software is not ready. Will, I need another month. But you don't get another month. It's going to happen in 3 days, whether you're emotionally prepared for it or not.
Has to be like feeling like a parent or something, right? You've taught your child, in this case your robotic race car, all these lessons, and now you have to see if those lessons actually sunk in. What was it like when it actually accomplished the goal that you set out to accomplish?
Oh, it was some kind of high for sure, because I've got all this nerves just really built up, and I'm expecting it to fail the moment we pass the other car for the very first time.
Really?
Yeah, I'm straight up like, oh, this one error I saw that one time that I thought I fixed is going to come back, isn't it? We're just going to drop that point and it's going to slam right into it. Oh, I'm terrified. But then it does it, and it does it another lap, and it passes another lap, and it's fine. And afterward, I'm like, oh my goodness, it worked. I can't believe it actually worked. Because no matter how much testing you do, you're always going to doubt your masterpiece. Yeah.
You don't know until it's put to the test, right?
Exactly. But just that immense joy when it does work. It's incredible.
Going back to the sensor, something I found really interesting. You have the three, the camera, the radar, the LiDAR. Each of them are great at certain things, maybe not so good at other things. And it's finding a way to mesh these all together. And it makes me think of what the human driver deals with, whether it's on the racetrack or just on the street. You're perceiving with your eyes, your ears. There's a sense of feel as well that goes into that. But you have to find a way to turn that into computer terms, right?
Right.
In a way that your car is going to understand.
That's right. That reminds me of a very interesting topic that keeps coming up as well. People ask us, have you talked with actual race car drivers? Have you talked with engineering teams that help these drivers analyze the same sorts of data that we're looking at out on the track? And yeah, we did. We talked with a lot of them back before we even saw any of these cars, before we placed our hands on them. And we tried to make it useful. We tried to take the information about the wind's going to change how your vehicle controls, and you have to feel how the car is moving and then anticipate how you need to change the steering so you keep the slip, and take that turn in this particular way on the IMS because that's the way to get around your opponents and really take it well. And we're trying, like, jotting down notes and memorizing everything that they say. At the beginning, we actually did not know how to translate that into machine terms, because that's exactly what we've come to the conclusion of answering these questions and thinking back retrospectively is our job now is to figure out how to translate that. And we didn't know at first. That's the project. That was the learning that we had to do. And I think we're definitely more at the point where we can look back at that advice and say, I know exactly how that fits into my system. That is a tweak on this controller gain. That is utilizing this sensor better. And it's really cool to see that growth over the few years we've been doing this.
The thing I've taken away being around this project over the last few years that I was not expecting is, as you talk about, you are breaking down what a human driver is doing to its component parts, finding a way then to translate that into the machine language. And that, to me, when you start to see let's set a human race car driver to one side, even the human driver on the street.
Sure.
The amount of information that you have to process to do something that we do every day and we don't think any more about. When you do break it down in the way that you do, all of a sudden, I came away with this greater appreciation for the task that the human brain is able to accomplish.
Oh, of course. Yeah, the human brain is the most incredible computer we have, and we don't have a compute system that's even close to the processing power of the human brain yet. Which kind of brings us to another part of the autonomy problem. We need to simplify what the human brain does. We need to find what are the most essential parts of that program that's going on up here. And that has been one of the keys in the racetrack, because we have such limited test time because the tracks are high demand and incredibly expensive.
Right.
And we're also sharing this track time with the 8 other teams. So we need to be very good at simplifying our system down to a way that we can work with it in this tight time frame. We need to be able to see exactly where the problem was when the problem occurs and then adjust the code in the hour between our next shot up and 30 minutes out on track. So simplification of what the human brain does.
Without giving away industry secrets, can you give us a couple bullet points of when you do boil it down to its most basic components? What kind of things are you identifying?
Let me think about that for just a moment. From an incredibly academic standpoint, like thinking about all the complicated research algorithms that we read papers on and we're trying to compete with and build upon the cutting edge of the research when we do publish as an academic, we started out with a lot of those ideas. Let's have incredibly complicated control logic, cutting edge, and then we find that makes it much more difficult to adjust our system during test days. It makes our system less flexible. If it's tuned in perfectly, if the assumptions that you make about the weather of the day are perfect, if your sensors are giving you quality enough data for you to run this really high edge algorithm, theoretically you'd get the better result out of it. But on average, we need to simplify down to something that's been published several times and you wouldn't be able to get a paper out about it anymore. So we've boiled it down to we've basically taken it from the complicated research level algorithm down to just textbook level.
Yeah, well, fair enough. And I know you don't want to give away anything. This is
right.
Incredibly intense competition between teams, but also there is a great deal of camaraderie. That's the thing I've noticed as well, being around the teams. As much as each team wants to win, and they clearly do, there is an element where it seems like everyone's in this together and they're all trying to paddle in the same direction.
Of course, and I think part of that comes from those early days back in 21 when we just had the one car and we needed to figure out how to turn it on reliably. We need to figure out how we get all the base communication software going before you even start putting your competition stack on top of it. All of that was done collaboratively. All of the teams were there together and learning these cars for the first time together. And I think a lot of that has stuck through the years. It's one of my favorite parts of the competition. I may not have fallen in love with it as much without that sense of community, because I do like to come back and see all of my friends on the other team, and I'm sad when they graduate and they leave and go off to big careers. And it's great to see the same faces that have stuck around.
Well, you did fall in love with it, though, and that's actually what I'm really interested in here, too, because you came at this from an interest in robotics, not necessarily in motorsports or in competition of this kind. So how quickly did you start to build that appreciation for what you were about to do and get that feeling of infatuation with this project?
It was probably a slow boil over those months of being together, and I don't think I realized it until it was almost over. It was almost October. I think it was 23rd when we had that first competition. I started to realize I might not see some of these people again, the people from Munich and from Milan and other places around Europe. It's possible I could have never seen those guys again, and we had built up a decent friendship, you know, a community bond. And so I was like, oh, I need to make sure I'm trading communications and spending time with them now at the end. And just that a little bit of fear of not having that experience anymore. And then the joy whenever the competition did actually continue on to further seasons. It was like, I have to come back. I have to keep being a part of it.
Well, you're right. At that time, we didn't know what the future held beyond that first event at Indianapolis. But since then, there have been several further competitions, and the way that this has progressed, the rapidity with which it has progressed, the complexity of the task at hand, going from time trials with a minimal amount of obstacle avoidance to a true passing competition where you're sharing the track with another entity that you don't have the data on. You don't know what that car is going to do. You have to have a car that's flexible enough in its own algorithm to be able to adapt to that. Just how much more challenging has this proposition become as we get deeper and deeper into the Indy Autonomous Challenge?
I think because I've been with it since the beginning, so I've been growing kind of along with it.
Sure.
It feels a lot like the same level of complexity from the beginning, because it was a struggle back then just to get everything started. And now that we have that baseline, I don't think about the baseline stuff working anymore because that's all good. And now it's just that same level of extra work to hit the next level. So to me, it doesn't feel like it's more complicated, even though I do, if I take a second and think about it, I realize we are achieving pretty incredible stuff. We certainly couldn't have pulled off what we're doing these days with the road courses and the passing competitions.
One thing I'm always interested in when I try and describe this to other people who work in the motorsports industry, it takes a little bit to kind of get them on board, but then they start to become interested. Are you feeling, or do you experience the same thing? And what is it like when you try and explain to friends at home or family members or whatever what it is that you're working on? What is that process like to try and get them to wrap their head around exactly the level of complexity and the level of cool that you're working with?
Sure. Yeah, that makes me think of all of the times that we've been lucky enough to show the car off to the general public. And we've taken it to a few racing events where actual Indy races are going on. And got to speak to people who are fans of traditional racing. And it definitely comes up with the question, oh, what's going on with this car? Is it a robot? You know, is it remote control? Everyone thinks it's remote control. Yes. We have to explain what autonomy is, and then they say, oh, that's taking all the fun out of it. That's the most common thing we get after, what is it? I don't understand. And then that's no fun. You know, who am I going to root for?
Sure.
And so what I've been trying to do in response to those sorts of questions is, I fell in love with it, as we've mentioned several times. So how can I get that same feeling to be shared out with the audience? How do I make them see it the way that I do? And so I try to talk with these people who are asking us these questions about how much work it is for the students behind it. Don't think of the car as an individual by itself. Think of all of the people who are putting their passion and effort into it.
And do you find that resonates, that message resonates with the folks you're talking with?
I think it does. A lot of people approach our particular car, because it has the big Auburn University symbol on it. And then they just walk away with like these smiles on their faces about, this is super cool that my university is doing this, that Auburn kids are doing this.
I think that actually is one of the neat hooks of this competition. It's not like it's the automotive industry that's with its millions and billions of dollars that's out here doing this. It is college students, undergrad, but mostly graduate students, but these institutions that are pursuing this. Why do you think this makes sense for an institution like Auburn to be involved in a competition like this one? And not just once, but to continue that investment now for many years?
It fits in very nicely with the research that my graduate lab was doing already. To me, it feels like a very similar project. Of course, it's not the same private sort of bringing in a bunch of money. It's really more public spending some money. But we get to do a lot of hands-on work, which is one of the deficits of graduate labs in general, is it tends to be more theoretically focused.
Sure.
Another thing is the longevity of it, the repetition, or how it continues to grow. because other projects that we have tend to just have a very short time span. You get done some very, very well-defined singular problem, you deliver the results, and then you move on to the next part of either your career or the next project for the grad lab. Whereas this project is able to build upon itself. We have something that starts from just a little seed and then grows, and you can see it becoming something better and better as you continue to work on it.
Yeah, it's clearly at the cutting edge. I mean, you just have to look at the car and that message sinks in. I want to go back to something you said earlier. You mentioned when you got into this, you didn't have a particular interest in cars, you didn't have a particular interest in racing, but if I'm reading between the lines correctly, perhaps your perception changed a little bit after dealing with this?
Right, I'm definitely getting a lot more interested. I don't know a lot of the driver names, and a lot of the terminology from the different leagues is still a little bit beyond me.
Well, you're not alone in that.
Fair, very fair. But just being around all of the other people, because there's plenty of other people involved in this who were avid race fans, who are avid, I'm going to tear my car apart and rebuild it type people. And it's just been fantastic learning from them and getting to fall into that same interest that they have, seeing how it can be very interesting, where I wouldn't have thought of it if I weren't in this environment.
Sure. Well, your story is fascinating because you have been there from the ground level. You've been there as this project has built to the point now that you're leading your own team. So what's next for you? How do you use this as a jumping off point to accomplish the goals and dreams that you've set off for yourself?
That's an excellent question, and I think it is a wonderful jumping off point. There's been so many different industry professionals, either from the sponsors of the competition or just any industry that's just interested in coming to the races, who have been talking with myself and a lot of the other students, and they're always trying to hire us. They say, what are you doing next? When are you graduating? So it'd be really easy to go from this and get just amazing research or technical career. For myself, I'm finding it very difficult to leave the racing because there isn't a professional racing equivalent to go into just yet. And I love my car. I can't leave my car, you know? Her name is Nova. She is very much so my baby, as well as the baby of my other team members. And I can't imagine walking away. And so it's kept me at the university for longer, which is another thing that the university appreciates.
I'm sure they do.
The master students stick around to PhD just to get more time with the car.
We've talked a lot about how this program has helped you develop, and that's a worthwhile end unto itself. But there's also, of course, going to be some trickle down from this that could potentially see some of this technology, some of the research that you're doing enter into our daily lives from an AI perspective, whether that's in automotive or elsewhere. So having been hands-on with this now for several years, what do you see as the most likely outcomes in terms of some of this AI entering our day-to-day lives here in the short-term future?
Sure. I think one of the most immediate benefits to the consumer market is going to be how we've been working with this technology. So a lot of this technology hasn't either been put in an automobile yet, or it hasn't been put in such extreme conditions. And so we're testing these sensors for these sensor building companies. We're testing the compute units, and in that sort of collaboration with these sponsors, making a better unit, making something that is more suited for this sort of environment. And those products are going to become publicly available. They're going to go into the OEM manufacturers of autonomous and ADAS, which is assisted vehicles. So I think that's going to be the most immediate, is the sensor improvements, the compute improvements that are being tested out in these vehicles. And then probably the next one up is going to be the people who do leave this and go into industry. They're going to be taking all of the learning that they've done, all of their experiences and their research ideas.
Yeah. AI is a huge talking point just in society today. There's a lot of hand-wringing about the effects of AI for good or for ill.
Sure.
When you see things like this written, or when you talk to family members that maybe don't work in this field, but they probably have opinions on it, first of all, what are you hearing, and what are your opinions on the potential positive and negative impacts that AI might have in our near-term future?
Sure. As far as true artificial intelligence, which is a very statistically learned model, we basically look at it as a black box. You put a bunch of information in, it figures out how to process that information, and then it spits a result out. Whenever I talk to people about AI, I expect this doomsday opinion. I expect hesitance. But surprisingly, even from the youngest person to the oldest member of society, they come up again and again thinking, this is really neat. Look at how much you can accomplish using this AI, particularly thinking of some of the language processing models that are out there today. There are so many people that you sit them down with it, they start to play with it, and then they're like, oh, I can use this to make this easier. I can design my recipes. I can figure this out. And it's really encouraging to see across a wide swath of the society that people are seeing the good in it, seeing the good that it can do.
Is it something that lends itself to getting hands-on with it, even at the most fundamental level, to start then to grasp what the positive outcomes might be?
I think so, yeah. Letting people just access some sort of an AI model and play with it, I think does make it more familiar, makes it more personal, and can take away some of that fear level.
It does feel like we're at the cutting edge of something here in society with AI starting to become integrated. And if you look at historical long lens, it does seem like typically when new technology starts to enter into a culture, especially revolutionary new technology, there can be some negative impact. So with that said, we've talked about the benign aspects of AI, but how about the malignant aspects? What things have you concerned as we look into the short term?
Sure. And we can look into the automotive industry to kind of think about that a little bit. The automotive industry tends not to trust AI by itself,
right,
because these are black boxes. It's very difficult to guarantee that they're going to give you the safe result that you need. It's very difficult to analyze what they're even doing to process this data. And so we tend to like to fuse it with more classical type approaches. This is where you take a scientist or an engineer and have them actually explicitly put their ideas down into how you should manipulate the input data into the output data. They are directly causing that program to give a result. You fuse the intentional programming with the statistical programming in order to get the high performance of the statistical programming, but the guarantees and the safety and the control of the classical programming.
Really interesting, as always. Anything we haven't touched on yet that you think people would like to know for those who maybe are coming to this that are new, they've not been following the Indy Autonomous Challenge, or even for folks who know a lot about it, but is there something that you've taken away from this that you'd like to make sure others are aware of?
Let me think about that for a moment. Because I've thought a bit about women in engineering quite a bit. Because I've been approached by people and they're like, are you with the racing? I'm like, I'm leading the team. And they're always amazed, which is a good thing to a degree, but I think that there shouldn't be that amazement. You know, it should be normalized. So something as visible as this really gives a great opportunity for women in engineering, women in motorsports, and women in intelligent fields in general, you know, people who are capable of doing things. It gives exposure to us, and it also normalizes it, because we don't want people to be amazed that there's a woman doing this engineering. We want people to be amazed that people can do this engineering.
Do you get a reaction from young people, young women, young girls in particular, when they find out what you're doing, and do you feel like you're having an impact?
I do. I've actually had several one-on-one interactions with younger females where they'll come in with their dad to see the car. The dad might be a potential sponsor, etc. We might see them just in the big public open events. And sometimes they're hesitant to approach the car and they need to be encouraged, or sometimes they'll just come right up and put their hands on it. And I tend to try to ask them, do you want to lead a race team when you're older? And like, yeah, say yes, say yes. And we do have a remote control mode, even though these are fully autonomous cars, which is more for testing and for show. I like to put the controller in their hand and let them wiggle the wheels when it's on display, and, you know, become hands-on. Don't be afraid to touch the technology. Don't be afraid to ask questions and to consider that this can be for you as well. And I like to think that just having that momentary interaction does change the perspective. It says, you don't have to stay away from it because you're a girl. This is something girls can do too.
A wonderful message for sure. A great one to end on as well. Stephaine, thank you so much for joining us, and so excited to see what the future holds, not just for you, but your entire team as well.
Yes, thank you so much for talking with me. It's been fun.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Inside Track. That was Stephaine Meyer of the Autonomous Tiger Racing Team at Auburn University. As she so aptly explained, the passion for racing isn't something that could be measured or predicted. It's something you just have to experience to understand. I'm your host, Ryan Marine. Join us next time on the Inside Track, where we speak with Simon Hoffman of the TUM Autonomous Motorsports team at the Technical University of Munich to discuss the more granular aspects of building out the brains inside their autonomous car.